Hello, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. We are happy to have you here at Learn on Demand Systems feature demo webinar. Today, we're going to discuss how to guide your students with easy to use instructions. Getting people into labs is not the difficult part. Helping them with their lab is what this section or this particular webinar is all about. So we've got lots of webinars about Cloud Slice and activities and stuff like that. This is more about just getting you started with the capabilities of using the platform, the Lab on Demand platform, and using it to develop labs that will be able to instruct people. Now, we've talked about in past webinars and past activities and things like that, we've talked about how to use your labs to make challenge labs, doing things like making sure that you're educating your end users, or I should say challenging your end users and then thereby educate them. But this is more about the basics. This is the rudimentaries. This is the instructions on getting into the basics of creating your lab. So we're going to be talking about using Markdown and the IDLX interface. Before we get started, I would like to mention that in your GoToWebinar, the control panel for GoToWebinar, there is a questions section. If you have any questions as we go through, please go ahead and type your questions in. I will be monitoring that question area and we'll be answering questions at the QA section at the end. But if one of the questions comes up and it is something that needs to be answered right away, one of our wonderful staff who is monitoring the questions area will get your response in there. And then, like I said, at the end, we'll go ahead and talk about any of those questions that might come up. So please feel free to use that question area at any time. So we have two phrases or two terms here, the Markdown and IDLX terms. So let's start with what is Markdown and why we use it and why you should use it as well. First of all, what is Markdown? Markdown is a plain text file format. Now, you may not be too used to working with plain text file formats as a method of delivering content, because in most cases, for example, if you're using a WYSIWYG text editor, and WYSIWYG stands for what you see is what you get. So something like Microsoft Word is a tool that formats the text and saves that format as part of a overall compressed image. So when you actually save a docx format for Microsoft Word, for instance, you are actually saving not just the rudimentary text that makes up whatever it is that you're typing, but all of the formatting and style sheets and all sorts of other content is saved in that docx. As a matter of fact, docx is a zipped file that contains all of that. And you can actually open that up with a compressed file editor and you can see all those files. When we use Markdown, there's one file and it is in plain text format. It's just ASCII text code. Now, that means that we have to put certain tags on there, and then those tags render in our lab interface with different things. And we're going to start talking about some of those tags in just a little bit. But why we use Markdown as a plain text format is because it doesn't require any special software. Now, we happen to have an editor within the IDLX interface, and we'll talk about IDLX in just a second. But the truth of the matter is you can edit Markdown with Notepad or Notepad++ or Visual Studio Code or whatever text editor you like to use, And then you could simply copy it and paste it into our interface, or you can potentially store it in a location and then access it, and we'll show you that at the end of the session. Markdown also converts easily to HTML. However, we think that it is easier to learn and certainly easier to write. Some of the contents of Markdown have tags that are on the front and end, sort of like you do with header and body and stuff like that inside of HTML. But the basic structure is much easier to use. And it is considered the unofficial technical writing standard. Now, when we say unofficial, that means there's no governing body that says this is how you do it. But in a way, that actually works to our advantage because Markdown has its own flavors, if you will. There are certain things that work inside of Markdown. For example, if you want to bold text or if you want to italicize text, those types of things work in everything, and it is a quote-unquote standard. However, you can add code into your Markdown, and then that code gets picked up by various renderers like Lab on Demand's Lab Interface, and it can take that render and display it with headings and with knowledge type and with other types of additional components. So we're going to show you the basics as well as some of the more advanced in this webinar. All right, next we have to explain what IDLX is. And you may not be familiar with this term. IDLX is the entire experience you get when using labs in Lab on Demand. So when you click on the launch button, you get a IDLX, and that means it's the lab interface, it's the delivery, it's the lab platform and the infrastructure running behind it. Overall, it is an interactive digital learning experience. And some of you may be keen to point out that there is no capital X in the IDLX itself, and that is absolutely true. We were just using it to designate how we got the different characters, instead of calling it IDLE, for instance. But there was a interface that was called IDL and became IDL Legacy, and now we have the next level, which is IDL X. So here is a combination of the elements that we use for IDLX. We've got the Markdown, including HTML and CSS. We have the concept of replacement tokens. We have the ability to put in external instructions, which we're going to cover here. We have lifecycle actions, which are components that allow you to spin things up. You have activities that you can put into your instructions or into your overall lab. And of course, you have theming, which can make your labs look different or more in line with your corporate identity. In addition to this, of course, we have the labs themselves with virtual machines or Cloud Slice and all that other kind of stuff. All of that put together makes up the IDLX. So let's get started taking a look at instructions in action using the IDLX editor. So we're going to start with an example here. This is an example of instructions that is just instructions. I know this seems a little bit weird, but a lot of our customers don't even think about this. You can actually use the Lab on Demand interface to write instructions for just about anything. You don't have to put it up with a lab. So here is a lab that, when you launch it, only brings up the instructions portion of the interface. So there's no virtual machine, there's no cloud, there's no portal or anything like that. We're not opening up a web browser. This is just an instruction. So let me go ahead and click on the launch button, and I'll minimize this desktop. Here is my lab. That's it. It's just a set of instructions telling you exactly what to do and giving you check boxes and being able to go, all right, I need to do this. Now I need to do this, and then this, and then this. And you can make sure that you are doing these things on your computer. So I want you to visualize this. You have a specific application that is on every employee's computer, whether it's somebody working from home using a remote desktop, or if it's somebody who's working in an office. Everybody's got the exact same software installed. You want to teach them that software, but you don't necessarily want a virtual machine because everybody's already got it and it's configured for them on their system. So you could have the instructions tell them to launch their program and then give them instructions that come up, and that's all this lab is just a set of instructions. Now, in another window, they could bring up, for instance, I'm going to bring up Notepad. They can have Notepad up, and then they can follow along with the instructions over here, and they can even copy and paste information over into whatever program it is that they're working with. So a lot of people think the lab is just virtual machines, and of course that is incorrect. We have Cloud Slice, we have Cloud Slice Resource Group, Cloud Slice subscription, we have hosting on AWS and Azure, as well as our other lab platforms with virtualization. But we can also just give you instructions and then you provide the environment. So I wanted to show you that just because you have a set of instructions available doesn't mean that you have to put it inside of a lab interface. Now, we will show you how you can put it inside of a lab interface as well. But before we do that, we need to talk about how we get to our editor. And we have two methods of getting to the capability of being able to edit inside of Lab on Demand. If you're inside of an existing lab, you go up to your hamburger menu and you go to Edit Instructions. This will bring up an editor, and here you can see an example of Markdown. Please note, under the Setting Up section here, we have from the gallery, create a new lab for my organization, bring the sizzle using the following settings. And then this is a table, and that is a table inside of Markdown. And it looks a little bit complicated and it looks a little bit convoluted, but in all actuality, it's very, very simple and easy to use. You just have in the different sections here, and there's a little bit of extra coding going on here because we've got the information that allows us to copy and paste from inside of this lab to the external application. But this is the editor screen, the IDLX editor, inside of Lab on Demand. So I'm going to go ahead and close out this lab and show you the second way that we can get into our instructions. This is the lab profile for this lab, and we can click on Edit Instructions, which now gives us a completely separate rendered interface. You can see on the left we've got our same Markdown, and on the right we've got our rendering of what that Markdown looks like. In most cases, this will be completely sufficient for you to be able to edit on the left-hand side and have the information appear on the right-hand side. However, some things don't always work properly. For example, if you are using what we call lab replacement tokens, which I'll show you in a few moments, if you're using lab replacement tokens, you're not going to see the actual replacement tokens, you'll see a placeholder. Whereas if you edit the instructions inside of the lab interface, then you'll get the actual lab replacement tokens. All right. So let's go ahead and close out our instructions here. Now I'm going to work with a sample. Now this sample happens to be working with Docker containers, but as you'll see, instructions can be put into any of our labs. I happen to use one with a Docker container just because it's quicker and easier to use. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and launch my lab. And you can see here that it's building, and now my lab is ready. I've got my virtualization, or in this case, a container, on the left-hand side, and I've got wait, there's no instructions. I'm on the resources tab. It's an important distinction to make that if you have no instructions in your lab by default will open up in the resources tab because it doesn't have anything to display. But you can go to the instructions and see the instructions, which there are none, and be able to see them appear as you edit them. Because all of our editing inside of our instructions is done in real time. So you have the ability to be able to see what you're doing. So let me show you that. Let's go ahead and edit instructions. Now, I'm not going to type a lot of things because I don't think it makes very compelling webinars to have you sit there and watch me type. But I am going to have to type a couple of things. So let's start off with welcome to your lab. Now, you'll notice that I'm putting a separate line between each line of instructions or each paragraph of instructions. That's because that is what actually separates the two lines. Or separates the rendering on the right-hand side. So I'm going to say, please log in and start here. All right, now if I take out this line, you'll notice that it doesn't actually put it on a new line. That's what I was getting at. Anything that is not separated by an extra line will not be counted as a new line. Okay, so this is nice. It's effective, but maybe it needs a little more pizzazz. So one of the things that we can do to jazz it up a little bit is use some of our standard markdown. Now, you may be saying to yourself, I don't know any standard markdown. I don't have any experience working with markdown. That's okay. Using our IDLX interface, you can get up to speed on our flavor of markdown really quickly and easily. Just go to the little question mark icon when you're editing your instructions. And this appears in both editors, either the one that's from the lab profile page or the one that's inside of your lab interface. And inside, you have a cheat sheet, as we call it, a set of instructions on how to build whatever you're looking for. Now, there are some things that aren't in here, although there are lots of things in here. There's how to put in a code block for putting in code examples, how to reference instructions, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. Dialog windows, commands, reference links, task lists, tables, all sorts of stuff here. But we're just looking for the rudimentary. We want to jazz this up. We're going to put a heading at the top. We're going to say, welcome your lab is going to be a heading. And the way you do that is by putting in a pound symbol. So I'll close this and go ahead and put in a pound symbol. Boom. Notice real time on the left, I type it, and here I'll backspace over. Here's welcome your lab now, and then I switch to my editor. I have to keep that up in the background. There we go. So now just to watch, I'm going to put the pound in, and boom, update it on the right-hand side. Now, it's important to note that this real-time editing is important, and it's effective to be able to show you when you make an edit on the left, you see what it looks like rendered on the right. But in addition to that, this lab is auto-saving. You'll notice that my save icon on the upper left is grayed out. That is because there is a default setting for auto-save, which means every change I make is automatically saved, especially after I hit the enter key or if I move, start moving things around. So the information that is being saved does give us the sort of problem of what happens if we select it all and we hit delete. Notice it goes away and it's already saved, right? My lab has saved this. So I'm going to go ahead and do a Control Z to bring my stuff back to undo what I did. But the important thing to remember is when you're auto saving, not only is it saving everything that you do it's saving everything that you do. So it's not just saving everything you do right, it's saving everything you do, which means that you could potentially save a markdown that you can't sort of easily undo. Making copies is a good idea. And we'll talk about how you can do version control and stuff like that with other tools. So we've now got the heading in there. If I wanted to, I can, I could italicize. Here's an example here. We can use either the asterisk or we can use an underscore. Either one of those will both work. So for example, if I wanted to make this italics, there you go. It's italicized. Okay. So it's really actually pretty easy to get the basics of Markdown. Now, what about making our lab a little bit more interactive, making it something where not only does it know who I am and it tells me and talks to me sort of by calling out my name, but also I want to be able to put stuff from the left, from the right of the lab interface into the left of the interface, either through a copy or through a type text. So let's go ahead and do the first thing that I mentioned first. Let's personalize this specifically for the lab taker. So the way I do that is I'm going to put a space in here between lab and exclamation point, and I'm going to use what's called a lab replacement token. Now, this may seem like I'm getting into advanced stuff, but this really isn't advanced. This is part of making your lab more exciting and more involving for the end user. So one of the things you can do is go to your lab replacement tokens. You can scroll through the list of available tokens here, and one of them is the lab user's first name. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to click on insert, and it's going to put that right where my icon was, which was between the lab and the exclamation point. And notice on the right-hand side, it has replaced the token with my name, my first name. So this is a way of being able to say, good job, lab user one. Excellent, lab user one, you have completed this. Or nice try, user one, let's try this again. There's all sorts of uses for this to involve the end user and make them feel like this lab is actually specifically designed for them, because with Lab on Demand, that's true, right? These labs are designed for each and every end user. So that's one method of interaction. Now let's talk about the interaction between the instructions on the right and the virtual machine, or in this case, container on the left. Please click on this to type text in the lab. Okay, so I've got this up here as a highlight, just something I can use. But now I want to actually make this text that will go into the left-hand side. And the way we do that is either with copy or with type text. So I'm going to show you the type text because this is the one that most people like to use. It only works with virtualization. And virtualization includes containers. If you're doing Cloud Slice, you're going to want to use the copy, which I'll show you in a second. But if I want to go in here and I scroll down to my special, I've got type text and copyable text. So we're going to start with type text here, and you'll see that my example, anytime I have an example here, I can click on the example and that will copy it to the clipboard, and then I can come in here and paste that with a Control V, and you'll see here that it gives you the type text and then the type text. But if I want to, I can replace that with this. And when I click on this, you'll see that it actually enters it into the left-hand side for me. That is what we call our type text. That is our form of copy and paste that happens from the instructions into the VM when using virtualization. Now, instead of that, I can actually make this copyable by putting 2 of these in instead of 3. And now you'll see that it changed from a T for type text to a copy or a copy to clipboard. And now when I do this, it doesn't type it in automatically. But if I go in here and hit Control V, or I'm sorry, go in here and do paste, now I can do it. Okay. Now, copy sometimes works from the right side to the left side. It depends if it's a container. It depends if you're using enhanced session mode and stuff like that. But the kind of rule of thumb is if you're using type text, if you're using virtual machines, use type text, and if you're using cloud technology, use copy. That's the best way of making sure that things work. And then last but not least, there's a couple of things that are really special or specific to sort of everyday, ordinary lab things that are important. So for example, if you want more information, check this out. There, just a bunch of random characters. Now, I can turn this into a couple of different things using our IDLX flavor, or I'm sorry, our Markdown flavor using the IDLX editor. And some of the things that you can use are what we call alerts, knowledge, and help. There's also hint and so on, but you may want to check some of these out. Here is an example of a knowledge, and I'm going to go ahead and put that in at the beginning here. And I'm going to take out the knowledge blocks, help students learn more. And now notice now we've got the icon and a slight gray background, right? Now, if I want to change that to something where it's important for you to know this, I can change that to alert, and now I get a different icon and a slight red background. So this gives us additional formatting options. There's things like hints that come up. I can change this from alert to hint, and it changes from an icon and back to the slight gray. So all of that type of information gets rendered, but this is just standard Markdown. Now, some of you may be asking, well, if it's just standard Markdown, can I store that someplace and then just call what I need so that I can have things like version control or different role assignments for different people who are doing editing, like editor and owner and reader and contributor? Well, those types of functionality depend on something called GitHub. And we're going to talk about that just as soon as I get back to my slides. So let me just end my lab here and bring up my desktop and my slides. All right. Let's talk about a marriage made in instructions heaven, or a match made in instructions heaven. GitHub and Lab on Demand give you some incredible functionality. GitHub has its overall storage mechanism. And by the way, I should mention that that isn't the only tool that we can use. We can also use what's called ADO, but not everybody uses ADO. So if you prefer, you can use ADO for storing these files. Again, they're just text files that have a little extra coding on them, but when they come across, they get rendered inside of our system with all of the extra things like lab replacement tokens and knowledge icons and all that other kind of stuff. So we can do this in two different ways. We can pull without thinking, meaning that we can have something stored there and we can pull that in using the include line. And I'll show you that. And then you can sync directly by using an instruction source inside of the lab profile. So let's give you an example of GitHub, and I'm actually going to show you two separate parts that will kind of give you a comprehensive look at how this works. So let me end my slide here. Oops, I need to, there we go. Taking a peek at GitHub and Lab on Demand. There we go. So here is an example of a lab that's running with GitHub, and it has a set of instructions. This is sort of an extra special look at what you can use GitHub to do, because it is possible to be able to go in and pull things from GitHub inside of your lab and put them inside of your lab. So let's go ahead and launch this. And I'll put this in the background. Now this is using a virtual machine, and you'll see here the instructions have me sign on to this virtual machine as a user. Notice that this is using the type text. So I can go ahead and just click on this. That puts the password in. And here I am inside of a lab. Now, this is what I was talking about. This is combining an activity inside of a lab with GitHub. So I have a lab that's all set up, but it doesn't have my lab files. It's got all of the software and everything I need, but I just want to get some like code snippets and maybe do some configuration of some files on the desktop. So all I do is click on this, and this runs an activity, and that activity is actually running in the background. And in a few seconds, you're going to see a all files directory or folder appear on the desktop, and then pretty soon this will say, hey, it's been complete, and now we've got this folder with all of the files I need. Now that's one way of involving GitHub, but that doesn't have anything to do with instructions. The instructions were already here, but if I want to, I can actually include a set of instructions that are out on GitHub as well. So I actually have a GitHub repository that is out there and available. And so I'm going to go to GitHub. Oop, there we go. I'm going out to GitHub here, and I'm signed into my repo here. And inside of my repo, I have a MD file, .md, which is the shorthand for Markdown, called include contents. And inside of the include contents, I've got just a bunch of random Latin and a couple of formattings here. We've got a heading, we've got a lab replacement token or two, we've got a subheading, and we've got some extra instructions in here. So in order to use this with our include statement, I need our raw Markdown file. I can't do it from this page. I actually have to go and get the raw file. So if I click on this, you'll see that my raw file comes across here in a link, and I can copy that right from the address bar. And now when I go back into my lab and I edit my instructions, notice what my initial sign-in looks like here. I'm going to go ahead and edit these instructions, and right at the top here, I am going to put a include with open and close bracket, and I'm going to paste that link. Oop, I forgot. I forgot to show you where you can see this inside of the help. So 1 second here. There, I'll take that out. Inside of the help, if you scroll down into special, you will see what is called an include. And it is, I used include instead of instructions. I apologize. So I click on the copy here, and I go up here and I right click and oops. There we go, Control V. And now that URL is not the correct URL. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the URL I copied, which I must have accidentally cleared. Let me just go back and get that real quick. There we go. Here's copy. And then back to my lab, my instruction editor. Here we go. And now I'm going to do my paste. And notice Welcome to your lab, Brian Bork. It's got the lab replacement tokens. We've got our information in here between our heading 1, heading 2. Now we're in our challenge overview. This is something that was, this particular item was included as an include to the include, so you can nest them. And all of the information is here, plus all of the information I had is still here, right? So I just put this in as a precursor to my instructions. So think about this. You could have a section 1, section 2, section 3, each as a separate markdown, and list them in the includes using the instructions command. You can put those in, and then you could have section 1 in one of your labs, section 2 in another one of your labs, or you could have section 1 listed first, section 2 listed second, section 3 listed third, and each of those would automatically populate, which means that if I go in and edit things inside of GitHub and commit them, I am tracking my commits, I'm tracking who's doing stuff, I know what's going on through GitHub, but I can pull that information down at any time into any of my labs. So that include is a include option using the instructions command is really, really effective inside of our lab instructions. Now, just one more quick thing. If I do want to fully synchronize this, meaning that I am going to be able to have bidirectional communication between GitHub and my lab, I can actually take my lab profile, I can go to the advanced tab, and if I scroll down here under instruction source, you'll see that by default it's using lab on demand, but I can change that and I can use a GitHub repository or an ADO repository. Notice that I do have to sign on and authorize lab on demand to be able to access this. And I'm going to go ahead and put my password in. And now it's going to say, all right, now where is the file you actually want? Because your account has access to a lot of stuff in here. And so I'm going to go in and I'm going to select my contents. It's going to go through and it's going to configure it. And my configuration is complete. I'm going to close this. And now one thing you're going to see is that you can see here that we've successfully synchronized, we're connected to GitHub. But now when I go into my instructions, close that editor out. When I go into my instructions and refresh my page, yes, I know, here we go. Notice that my original content was gone and replaced with only the content that's out at GitHub. That's because we're no longer tracking the content from that was local to Lab on Demand. We are tracking only the source from GitHub. And now when I go to edit instructions, you'll see here, hey, this uses an external source, so just be aware of that. But if I do make a change, like maybe I don't want my @user lab last name, you're going to see I can't actually make the change here, right? I can't, I'm hitting all sorts of keys, nothing's coming across. That's because this can only now be edited in GitHub, all right? That's the reason you get this, it's using an external source. All right, that is a lot to take in, but I've got a little bit more for your brains, and that is just some information. Let me bring up my slide. And let's talk about a couple of resources. If you need some information about implementing instructions, you can check it out at LODS.one or LODS.1/variable display doc. That's all one word, no spaces. That's what we call a shortened URL. And then we've got, join us for another webinar. There will be another one of these feature demos, but a different topic. Next Thursday, October 22nd, you will be learning the organization optimization using OneLearn TMS. And I'm pretty sure they put those in just to see if I could get tongue-tied like I did. And that you can find out that information about how to sign up for that, as well as recordings of past videos and other future feature demos that are coming up. And you can check that out at lods.1/feature demos. And if you are a brand new lab developer and maybe don't even know how to create a lab profile or work with lab profiles, go ahead and sign up for our lab developer workshop, basic training for Lab on Demand. That's taking place on Thursday, October 29th. You can sign up for that at lods.1/workshop. And with that, I'd like to say thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at another webinar coming up soon.